and I'm delighted to welcome Joanna MacGregor. Joanna is a fantastic concert pianist. She's also head of piano at the Royal Academy of Music. She's also music director of the Brighton Philharmonic Orchestra, and also Joanna is a CBE. It's fantastic to chat to Joanna. I know you are just a terrific speaker and delighted to have you in our series.
Thanks very much. It's lovely to join you.
Joanna, it's a very difficult time for everyone, especially for everyone who doing performing arts and of course for pianists. But I know that you also had, ups and downs in your career as a young person. So perhaps we could talk a little bit about that.
Yes, it's very interesting, this lockdown. It's very, as it goes on, it becomes harder and harder, obviously. Very difficult to know how to be as an artist and how to be a musician. And my background's quite unusual for a musician in many ways. I didn't go to a regular music school. I came out of a more ordinary background, if you like. And I made my way, I think, in a rather self-reliant sort of inventing my career as I went along. And I was thinking that actually those kinds of pathways can be quite useful now, because we are all having to invent
Sure.
things such a lot. All the old ways are kind of falling away, at least temporarily. So I'm always thinking about that very difficult time in some ways when you stop being a student and you
Yeah.
start being a professional, and how fragile that time is, and how vulnerable young musicians are, and what we can do to help them.
Gosh, but I mean, it's really exciting. I think we're all dying to find out some tangible examples, as you were, because I know also from our previous discussions that you went to Cambridge and read academic music, and then that's also was different, right?
It was very different back then. It was really different. And I still think probably for an instrumentalist like a pianist, it's quite different, because you should spend so much of your time right from your childhood through your teenage years practicing. And actually that is what I did, but I did it in a rather different way, I think, in a different environment. And in some ways, in those later teenage years going into my early 20s, it was almost self-taught, in the sense I didn't have lessons every week, which is of course what you have at a conservatoire. I was going to, my mother had taught me when I was very young, and then I went to Christopher Elton when I was 17. And then as a student in Cambridge, I used to go and see him once a month, maybe once every 6 weeks. So it was a different type of finding my way as a pianist. But what I'm really reminded of is that really for most of us as musicians, we should be able to do lots of different things. We have to have different ways of being a musician, not just one way. So inevitably, if you're a concert pianist, you have to play at a very high level, and you have to play a lot of repertoire. These are the two non-negotiable things we know about.
Yeah, sure, sure.
And so all young pianists, whoever you are and whatever your background, you're going to have had that time practicing 6 or 7 hours a day, being happy to do that, feeling comfortable doing that, and building up your core repertoire. And then at the same time, you've got to find your artistic identity, which is slightly different, I'd say, and that you have to find the music and the musical pathways that actually make you quite individual and give you something to say. And I think they're not contradictory, but you do have to be aware of those things.
Because yes, you have done many, many things, multiple things. I mean, especially, I'm admiring you for loads of curation, so, and I believe that you started doing it from quite young years, and I think you'd recommend this to everyone, right? In this time.
So I started when I was at school, putting on concerts and putting on performances of all kinds. I directed plays and all kinds of things. I was somebody who really liked organizing performances and, getting together groups of people and doing things. And I even started working with composers when I was very young. I hung out with composers really from about the age of 15, and we used to write each other pieces and all this kind of thing. And in many ways, that's just never gone away. That interest, that desire to make things happen and to put things on, not just for yourself, but for other people, because that's how you make a network. That's how you meet people. That's how you learn to promote concerts, and you also find things out. I mean, you come across music and musicians that you didn't know about, and it does profoundly change you. You learn how to do things like improvise, for example, or play different types of music, non-classical music. I think all of this now is embedded much more in a curriculum at a conservatoire. So it's much more normal now to have those types of skills taught to you. But we still have to remind musicians that this is what's going to sustain you, actually, this ability to look beyond yourself and look beyond your own practice. And lockdown is another way of thinking about all these things. But, you know, lockdown is very extreme. It's a very unusual period of time for all of us. But on the other hand, I am reminded of what it was like to be 21. You know, actually, and now what? What are you going to do? How's it going to happen? You know, how will you go forward?
Yeah. Yes, so I believe that, as you mentioned, of course, at the very beginning of our interview, that it was a very challenging time. I mean, the most challenging time, you know, when you finish and graduate. So what do you recommend, let's say, for people who are maybe in their final years or just finished?
Well, that's such a good question. It's a really good question. And I'm always telling my own students to think ahead. Even when they're a first year undergraduate, I say, think of yourself in 5 years' time. And they look rather startled, obviously. But I say, think about who you might want to be. Where do you see yourself? What would you like to be doing? You know, even small things like, where would you like to live? You know, what kind of environment do you think you might be in? And although some of that might feel like a fantasy, it's not a fantasy. It's actually asking yourselves questions about what kind of environment do I want to live in? And do I want to be surrounded by books? Am I the kind of person that loves playing chamber music because I need to be with people all the time? Do I want to spend a lot of time on my own? And in which case, how am I going to, you know, make that into a career? You know, does that mean I'm just going to practice a lot on my own? Do I want to curate? And I very often say to my students, not just, okay, what repertoire are we doing next year? Because they always have deadlines and competitions. I often say to them, what are you going to do in 3 years' time? What repertoire would you like to be doing? So I think sitting down and sometimes writing down your big ideas, big plans, big ambitious ideas is a good thing to do straight away. It's a map, really. You're giving yourself a roadmap about where do I want to be, you know. And that does include, for pianists, these big competitions, which, as you know, come down the track at you a long way off. You know, we're now in 2020. A lot of competitions have been postponed and rescheduled. So people are thinking about 2022. How can I get that ready? How can I be in Spain for that competition? How can I go across to America? How can I finance that? And then at the same time, they should at the same time be thinking about, but what's the repertoire for me that I should be learning? What's right for me? Should I be learning Brahms too? You know, big piece. And so.
Because I think many, I think, just take on whatever, right? You know, the piano repertoire is so big that it's the desire to repeat a lot of things that are played all over the time, and I think actually not much is explored. You at least you hear the pieces that are performed again and again.
It's a very interesting question, is how you develop your repertoire, how you do it. When I was very young, I used to have these. Occasionally wrote in the notebook columns of early and Baroque music, classical repertoire, romantic 20th century back then. And I would just sort of keep an eye on where all the gaps were. In my what hand? Oh gosh, there was a huge gap here in French Impressionism. What am I going to do? You know, because when you're young, you do want to play everything, and you want to feel that you can offer the main core repertoire. However, you know in yourself quite early on what you're particularly interested in. In my case, it was, when I was young, it was Bach, and it was contemporary music. So I had these two great passions of Bach and contemporary music, working with composers and premiers. But all the time in between, I really kept an eye on, you know, how many Beethoven sonatas could I play? You know, could I actually offer? You know, because that is your bread and butter when you're going to work at a music club, or when somebody rings you up at the last minute, say, to step in, which is a very common thing for a young musician. You've got to step in, and they say, well, this person was doing this type of program. Can you emulate that? So, yeah, but I remember doing a Radio 3 interview with a very famous pianist who was the same age as me, and we were talking about concertos, and this other pianist revealed that they'd never learned a concerto unless they'd been asked to play it. And I was quite surprised by that, because obviously it meant that they were just reacting to whatever anybody asked them to do. And of course it's good to learn if somebody comes to you and says, can you learn this piece? And you go, oh, I didn't think of that. Yes, I will learn it. On the other hand, you must have your own ideas too. I understand in the realm of concertos, because obviously it seems impossible unless somebody asks you, how else are you going to learn? And especially now, obviously orchestral repertoire seems, far off at the moment. It's all cut out. However, I think in the area of concertos for pianists, there are, apart from all the big core pieces that everybody wants to play, Rachmaninoff, Beethoven, Brahms, naturally, Prokofiev 3, there are so many other things that are good to think about. And, for festivals, people are very interested in your ideas. Exactly. I'm a big fan of the Schnittke piano and strings concerto. I can't even remember how I came across this piece. I have no idea, but I heard it and I thought, I have to learn this. This is so brilliant. And in the years I've played it and I've recorded it, that's a piece you compare with so many other piano and strings pieces. You compare it with Bach concertos. Yeah. And I'm delighted to say quite a few of my students have learnt this piece now. And they love it because it's so dramatic. Yeah, it's like a film score. It's so full of power and emotion and filmic scenes going by. So it really appeals to people, I think.
You touched, the world of competitions. Are they important for young pianists or musicians, let's say?
You know what I always say to young musicians? I only ever really did one competition, and that was YCAT. And I was really lucky. It was right back in the early days of YCAT. They took me on, and it was a fantastic apprenticeship, and I had a wonderful time. I used to play loads of concerts every week. What I say to young people is this: if you're able to withstand the disappointments of going in for a competition, and you really don't mind not getting through the first round or two, but you find it an interesting way of learning repertoire and giving deadlines to yourself, just do it. Do a competition, because they are interesting, they're fun, you'll meet other people. Sometimes you go to really interesting places if you get accepted. If you're the kind of musician that it's going to crush you not to progress, don't do it. Don't do it. I think there are other ways. There are other ways of being a musician, and lots of examples, big names in the music world who never won a competition in their lives, or just won one. They just did one when they were really young, and that was it. But even agents now say to you, there are so many competition winners. It doesn't necessarily mean you're going to go off and have this massive career, does it? I mean, what do you think?
I mean, look, I have a story of winning a competition at a very young age, a very major one, and touring again. But the trouble is that, of course, at some point the concerts that are provided, they're cancelled. But I mean, I was lucky; I picked up others. But it wasn't a straightforward experience. I would say that.
No, I don't think it is. I think if you were lucky enough to win a big competition, you've got to absolutely go into it with your eyes open and know that all these concerts are just attached to that 1 year, that year of your conquest, as it were. And then after that, they'll disappear. So what you have to do is understand that, this great excitement and everything, but at the same time build your repertoire. I think what a lot of young pianists don't realize is that you can eat through repertoire quite quickly. And so you've got to have this huge bank to go back to. And what I've noticed with young musicians who do devote themselves a lot to competitions is that their repertoire is very small and
Very
they keep on
limited.
repeating the same pieces all the time. And when you repeat pieces over and over again, they don't necessarily get better. They sometimes get worse because there's a sense where they've slightly switched off playing their party prelude and fugue and their party Chopin study and then their party piece Beethoven sonata, and without meaning to, they've lost that excitement that first impelled them to work on these pieces. So I would say what you've got to do is, alongside that, be constantly learning new repertoire and mixing it up a bit. And I remember when I was very young, and I did get a lot of concerts, both through YCAT and then through being taken on by an agent, Penn Williams. My goodness, you get through repertoire, because if you do well and they want you back, you've got to have a completely different program and you've got to come back with lots more pieces. Same thing with concertos. So it's a good idea to use your 20s to learn a lot, because you're really quick in your 20s. I think you're very quick. You've got a really quick brain, quick mind. You can learn things very well, very, very quickly. And of course, as you get older, you do slow down, just because your hard drive is filling up. Your life is becoming more complicated. So
I have a question actually that I'm thinking a lot about, and this is to do with live streaming. So we all have watched this fantastic Wigmore Hall series, but I just think that probably for performance, okay, it was a selection of people, but I think when we go forward, there will be a lot of live streaming now. But my worry is that basically, if you have the program uploaded and everyone can hear it, and anyway, how a pianist works, they have a program and they kind of take it, to different places. So do you think now, when everything is streamed online, that we really have to broaden our repertoire, because no one would want to hear what's already kind of pre-recorded?
I think that's a really good question. And I think there are two answers to that. One is, quite a lot of these venues now are going to just have them live stream live and then take them down, because they're trying to encourage people to buy tickets to things. So in fact, just this morning, I got an email because I've agreed to do a live stream concert in the middle of August. I'm feeling rather worried about this because I feel so out of practice as a performer, but I'm doing a live stream recital. And in that case, the venue is, you buy a ticket and then you just watch it live, and then they take it away again. So I think there'll be more and more of that, rather than the YouTube model, which is you do something for nothing and it sits there forever.
Yeah.
And as you say, there's nothing, then what do you do? I've been toying with the idea, and I think I'm going to do this, which I think a lot of musicians are good at and they should develop, which is talking about music. So not just playing a recital, but actually sitting at the piano and talking about how it works and talking about how to practice it and giving slightly more the inner workings of a piece. And I'm really thinking about doing a series on my website about the Beethoven sonatas in this way, because I'm currently working on them for some big complete cycles at the end of the year. And we all know that pianists, in order to learn and practice things, it's really, I think, quite fascinating to hear how people do things and to talk about things from a really sort of inner athletic model about how you do get around these passages that are so difficult. And I wonder if there's, rather than just trying to replicate the recital online, that we should try in a way and allow people to see different sides of us as a musician. That might be a more interesting way of surviving in this strange period. And then we can all go back to being these, distant figures on stage that somehow glide onto stage and just play. But it might be interesting, a bit like you're doing with your talking to a lot of pianists, that perhaps, a version of this is, I've got to know, with the online teaching, I've got to know my students in a completely different way. It's not the same online teaching. Obviously, it's very difficult and very frustrating in lots of ways. But I really feel that we've had conversations about their lives and the music they're playing, and also the way they're trying to play it. We've had really terribly interesting conversations. It's really been quite moving, and rather intimate and rather fun. And I'm wondering if there's a version of the online world that we could find like that.
But I know that the Royal Academy is one of the first institutions to have opened, right? So, so what precautions are there? Because I must say, I went to the dentist yesterday, and
Oh, wow.
I was greeted by a person I thought that is on a NASA mission to the moon. You know.
That's so funny. And I'm desperate to go to the hairdressers. I haven't got round to, my hair is just growing like a mane. Well, I'm going in to teach next the end of this month. And obviously they've opened up for teaching and practicing, most importantly, because so many pianists find it difficult to practice. And apparently it's great. I mean, it's all they've limited the numbers that are in the building, so it's quite quiet, and they have one-way systems up and down the staircases, and it's all and hand sanitizers everywhere. It's all very quiet and calm and nice. Apparently, there's no sense of danger or anything. There's no way of eating yet there. I mean, that'll be the next stage is how any of us can, because when we all go back full time, I mean, obviously we have to be able to eat and drink somehow to do these very long days that we will do. Yeah, and they're very good. I mean, that's kind of something else I wanted to talk about is how difficult it is for pianists to practice. When you're young, you rely on being at a conservatoire, don't you, or a university for practicing very much to go into a building. And so lockdown happened, and that was very tough for a lot of instrumentalists who didn't have great pianos at home at all to practice on. Or it's difficult to practice because of your neighbours and all that. And to this day, if I look at a house, I work out where the piano could go. I mean, to this day, if I look at any building, I go, couldn't live here because there's nowhere where the piano could be away from the neighbours. I'm super sensitive about this because I very often practiced at the school for this reason. I didn't practice at home, and so I'm very aware of how difficult it is for access to pianos and all that. So.
There's a question also that maybe you have some tips that you could share. I mean, many also, young pianists, especially who already graduated, they of course can't go to a conservatoire, and they practice at home. So, and it becomes that your home is your work as well. There is no boundary, and especially in the lockdown, we have seen that, there is just no boundary between your life and your work and your life and your work. So how do you, because of course, you, as an established pianist, you work probably at home as well. So any tips that you have?
Gosh, and email made this all much worse as well, because I ran, the first festival I ever ran was in 1990 or something like that. 1990, a long time ago. And there was no email back then. We did it with fax machine was the new thing. And everybody went, oh, the fax machines is terrible. We'll never get any sleep because people can fax us in the middle of the night. And things like answering machines, and of course what's become much worse is this endless 24/7 email that comes through at you. And I'm fascinated that in Germany, I'm led to believe that you're not allowed to send work emails after hours. Really? It's by law or something. They have quite a strict thing about this. If you work for a firm, you cannot send emails because it's seen as a sort of harassment.
Really? Wow.
Whereas we don't have that here, do we? I mean, we're all sending emails all the time. And so I think rather in the way that you have to have a plan about how you're going to practice every day, don't you? Mm-hmm. None of us hopefully just sit down and go, oh, I think I'll do a bit of practice, but I'm not sure what, and I'm not sure how long for. That hopefully you sit down and you have an idea of what you're going to do. And when you're young, it's deadlines that force you to practice because you've got an exam recital coming up. And as you get older, it might be a concert program that's coming around the corner at you. But you do have to have a sense of how you're going to use your time. And so practicing is one of the first things that teaches you that, so you have a series of pieces you've got to learn to play, and you can't practice them all at once. So you have to pick them off, and you then have to narrow down to sections. And I think probably one's working life is a bit like that, isn't it? You have to have, okay, this is the hour where I do the emails. Now I'm not going to look. And this is the hour where I make those phone calls because they're very important and I need to do that. And then I'm not going to do that. Am I being too strict about this? You just have to find a way of planning your time, because otherwise you'll be up all night doing things and working. What do you do?
I mean, I'm trying to have a routine, but I must confess I do not always stick to that. And then I feel guilty. But the days I stick to my routine, I feel on the top of the world, you know. So that
I think it's really hard, but I find, because I've always done quite a lot of different things, you know, I do this wonderful job at the academy, and I have my days where I'm in teaching and examining and doing all of that, and dealing with all kinds of students and their problems, and then I've got days where I've got to do concerts and I deal with that, and then I've always run festivals, you know, alongside that. So I've very often started my day by making a note of what I need to do, you know, and I can quickly write it all down, quickly planned it, and then when I get very frazzled, I do that even more, you know, because it's my way of calming me down, and also my way of understanding where the boundaries are and what I can achieve, you know, in any one day, because otherwise Monday, conquer the world, Tuesday try world peace, you know, something. It's kind of impossible. So you have to kind of be very, very you know, sometimes I just think about the whole week and what I'm trying to do with that week, you know, what I'd like to. It's going back to that idea of me saying to a student, where would you like to be in 5 years' time? You know, what would you like to do with your life? You know, it's only an exercise, so you can really just keep on thinking calmly and kindly to yourself about, what do I really want to have happen, and how can I get there?
I mean, you know, let's talk about curating festivals and curation in general. So that's something that's, I mean, personally interests me a lot. And I know you've been a very successful sort of creative director of many festivals. And I know you've transformed Dartington, for example. So is there a good recipe? Or if they say, okay, we have a festival, are there some kind of components that you think, okay, we have to have this and mix? Or is it just more sort of ad hoc, who sends you a nice proposal, then you take it?
No, it's never based on who sends you a nice proposal. That doesn't work. What you want to do is, if you're asked to run a series of concerts somewhere, or if you're asked to take over a festival or something like that, or work with an orchestra and make something happen, the first thing you must do is understand the background and the history of that festival or that concert series or that orchestra. So the first thing you do is a little bit of homework to find out what's happened, say, in the last 10 or 20 years. And what you will often find with any organization is that they've had ups and downs, and good things have happened and bad things have happened, and funding has come and gone. And you want to understand the history of the organization, and you want to understand the audience that they currently have, because the current audience is your friend, you know. And it's very common that an organization will say to you, well, we want you to develop the audience, you know, can you make the audience bigger for us, you know, or can you make them younger, or can you make them more diverse? You know, they come up with all these. You say, yes, I can. But the first thing we've got to do as well is keep your current audience with us, because they are your loyal, you know, family. And you have to have a little look and understand the audience that is coming. Why do they come? You know, what do they come for? Who are their favorite performers? What kind of repertoire were they coming for? You know, what time of day do they come? So you get that sorted out in your head. You go, oh, fine, okay, this is very important. We must hang on to this. And then around that, I can build lots of new things and lots of very nice things around that, not cancelling what's working, and encouraging them to think about that as well, because the new stuff will bring in your audience, but you don't want to block out who you've got. And I think that's a really important thing that a lot of people forget, is what they tend to do is come and sweep the old stuff away, go, oh yes, let's just sweep it all away and start again. No, it's much harder and more subtle to just bring everything together all the time and not alienate people, which is a sort of paradigm of classical music itself, because often we're always talking about where are the young audiences, how can we get more classical music out to people, and then people start doing wacky things and, you know, frightening off the audience they've already got. Well, the thing is, clearly you've got to keep everything, the whole show, on the road. And then the other thing I would say always with running a festival or concert series is come in with your black book of friends who are musicians. Come in with your cast list of friends who play wonderfully well and will come and collaborate with you. Without that, you're just cold calling all the time. You're picking up the phone to people you don't know and saying, oh, hello, I don't have any money and maybe you'd like to come and do a concert for me. But actually what you've got to do is come in, have your black book of friends who are, you know, really go back a long way with you, love doing concerts, you've done things with them before. You call them up and say, okay, I've taken over this festival, we don't have much money, but you know, you'll have a great time. Come down and have a great time with me. And then you build up that bulk of your program, and then you can do a bit of cold calling and ring up someone you don't know, say, how about you come? So that's going back to being a very young musician again. One of the most useful things you can do is develop your network and your friends within the world of music. So you just find out who you like working with, and this could be conductors, composers, other pianists, other instrumentalists, singers. I started working with multimedia artists quite early on in my career, which was, you know, unusual back then because all the laptop technology wasn't as mobile and as easy as it is now. I mean, back then it was all terribly bulky and boring and tedious, and you'd hump huge bits of equipment in. So this is why you're trying to, from a very young age, right still when you're a student, build up your address book, basically, because one day you'll be asked to do something quite big, and these are all the people you want to call on. And also you can recycle some of the concerts you've done which you know are going to work, surefire hits, and then you can invent all the new stuff as well. So I don't think anybody springs into the world as a fully formed artistic director. It's a kind of result of everything you've been working on while you were really young.
But I'd like to actually, reposition the question about also your sort of directorship, or let's say being a creative head. So as a young pianist, you know, what shall I, let's say, have in my email or in my positioning when I write to these festivals and say, here I am, you know, I would like to offer you this, this and that. So is there is there anything that would attract your attention? Because, you know, you've probably received so many also sort of proposals, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, I think you've got to be realistic. When you send a proposal in, and I mention this to my students when I'm running career sessions, when you send a proposal in about yourself, you've got to understand that probably you won't get a reply. And that doesn't mean that they don't like your proposal. It just means they're inundated. And what a lot of artistic directors do is put something, if they like the look of something, they go, oh, that's quite interesting, and I'm just going to put it to one side and I'll keep that in mind. Because the other bit that's hard to get your head around is that everybody has to plan a long way ahead. So people are very often planning 2 or 3 years ahead. So they can't get back to you and say, this looks great, come and play next month. It doesn't work like that. And I think as long as you understand that, and you must also find out the name of the artistic director or the administrator. You know, make it personal. So, you know, not just say, dear director, I feel sure you'll want to book me. No, just, you know, that's easy. You know, there are big books telling you who's running every festival. And then you probably keep it short. Don't go on and on about yourself, but give them some examples of different programs you've been playing. I always think it's a good idea to have a classical court program, which could be an evening recital and a lunchtime, because don't forget, very often artistic directors run lunchtime recitals for young artists, you know. So lunchtime hour-long things are great, and also late night hour-long things are great, because again, if you're a young artist, it's unlikely they're going to put you in a 7:30 slot, which is very expensive for them, but they really would love you to play to different time of day. So, and I think that's good. So think of that. Think of chamber music as well that you already play, and then think of some themed stuff. Now, this is where curation gets very interesting. And in fact, I run a sort of little professional skills exams actually in this at the Academy now for postgraduate and undergraduates. I set them a task. I say, okay, you're playing at the Wigmore Hall. It's going to be broadcast on the radio. It's got to be exactly 57 minutes, and I want it to be themed. And by that I mean, that year there's an anniversary of a composer, or you've decided to do a collaboration between a living composer and the influence of that, coming down from Chopin or whatever it is. You've got to show me how you're going to curate something, so it's not you just playing, the same old, but it's something that actually it really goes on in real life now, which is, so it's just a skill you've got to learn, that's all. And it's very simple, it's quite fun. And so you get into the habit of saying, oh, okay, whose 200th anniversary is it this year? And okay. Or shall I do something to do with late night food and something? You just get into the habit of thinking in that rather more festival way. It's because that's what festivals are. They are ways of presenting concerts in a location for a particular local audience and in rather a festive manner. So.
Gosh, well, that's fantastic. I mean, I shall take it on board if you don't mind. I'm sure it's so helpful for many of our listeners. Now, I cannot not touch of course, the aspect of online at the moment, and online as a platform for promoting yourself or performing. So, I guess there is no way back. I think there's only way forward. We've entered now the online world, and it will be developing. Do you have any interesting or exciting projects that we musicians could offer apart from just, let's say, concerts? I mean, you mentioned just a bit briefly talks and things, but if we take it as a new medium.
Yeah. Well, I think these days probably all young musicians need to think about having their own website. And I know that sounds daunting, but it's not difficult and it's not expensive. So every young musician, before they graduate or leave wherever they're studying, try and put up your own website. However simple, it doesn't matter. And on that website, there are a few very basic things which you know about. But in terms of the online content, what I would suggest is you could certainly have you playing a few things, which is a YouTube model, that's fine. But you're talking beyond that, aren't you? So maybe how about you take a recording of you playing something and team up with an artist and get the artist to, in some way, do an animation or a short film or do something very beautiful, say to one of the pieces you're playing. Could be a 5-minute piece, could be a 10-minute piece, doesn't matter. But this will make you look slightly different and slightly more creative. I do think if you can bear it, if you're that type of person, speaking to camera is very nice about what you're playing or how you're playing it. Just doing something that's a little bit more than you playing your repertoire. And I think also I just can't get away from this fact that we all have careers because we're generous to other musicians. It's not about yourself.
True.
It's not about me promoting myself.
True.
Curating is a version of this. You're being generous to other musicians. You're asking them to come in and do something. And you're not playing in all the concerts at all. It's not about you. You are absolutely creating space for other people. What you're doing is very generous by interviewing people and talking to them. It's a very generous thing you're doing with your time. And I think this is the bit of being a musician that we have to remind youngsters about. It's not just about practice. I want to be famous. Can I win this competition? Could I go on a world tour? It's actually a bit more than that. It's this old Baroque model of being a musician where they were great teachers, great composers, choir masters. They wrote stuff, they improvised. They just basically were all-round musicians who made things happen around them all the time, wherever they were. And so perhaps that Baroque model could go online now. so, so we're now online versions of this. So it's not just about I'm a very good pianist, but it's more about I'm a very interesting pianist because these are the people I know. This is what I'm interested in. This is a collaboration I'm currently working on. You know, that kind of thing, maybe.
Gosh. Well, Joanna, and finally, a really last question. What would be, and we've covered this, I'm sure, but just, to summarize, what would be your advice to any pianist or let's say even musician in this difficult time without really kind of live opportunities? Hopefully they're gradually coming. But any words of wisdom or inspiration?
Well, my big advice is do not give up. Don't stop, because it's a very difficult time for everyone. Even I feel a bit down at the moment, going up in and out of lockdown. It seems very strange. When I was very young, I read that wonderful book about the art of practicing by Neuhaus. And there was a page, and I remember to this day, I was sitting on Chalk Farm Tube Station, feeling very low. I was about 22, and I just thought, I'm never going to have a career. And in this book, there was this one line where he said, if you're passionate about playing the piano and you really, really want to play it and you're prepared to work hard and you're prepared to be a musician above all else, then that's what will happen. You will be that musician. And I remember reading this, sitting alone on this station waiting for a tube train, and it kind of changed my life. I was so inspired by that. So I would just say that really, you just don't keep on being passionate about what you're doing, but recognize that being a musician is probably a bit wider than perhaps you thought when you were little. When we were little, we just played and did grade exams and, were rather limited almost, in our version of being a musician. But remember that throughout history, the greatest musicians are the ones who are very, very outward facing all the time. And so you will be a musician. Don't give up.
Thank you. And that was Joanna MacGregor. And thank you so much for your absolutely brilliant interview. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.